Judy's Magic Cast-On isn't just for the toes of socks. It also makes a great provisional cast-on, especially if you have a lot of stitches to cast on provisionally. I've made a loop of yarn. One end is attached to my ball, and the other is about 30 inches long, so that I have enough to do a lot of stitches. And holding my needles parallel to each other and pointed to the left-hand side, I'm going to loop my yarn over the bottom needle and then hold that in place with my thumb. Then I'm going to take my tails and hold them like I would with a long tail cast on. The thumb is going to provide yarn for the top needle, and my index finger is going to provide yarn for the bottom needle. I have a stitch on my bottom needle already, so the first motion is going to be to put yarn on the top needle. So I'm going to angle my needle tips down, put the yarn in between top and middle needle, and then retension my thumb. Then I'm going to swing my needle tips over the index finger yarn and put the yarn between the needles so that it gives a stitch to the bottom. So now I have two on the bottom, one on the top. Again, my needles are going to swing down, and I'm going to grab the yarn from my thumb with it going between the two needles, and that puts a stitch on the top needle. And then the needles go over the top and then swing around, and that gives the stitches to the bottom needle. So I'm going to repeat doing this, and you get a nice flow going. Now, using this as a provisional cast on, you'll need to cast on the number of total stitches on both needles. So if my pattern says to provisionally cast on 100 stitches, I would need 100 stitches on the bottom needle and on the top needle. So I've just done a top needle one, so now I need a bottom needle, top needle, bottom needle, top needle. And then when you start to run out of room on your needles, you just slide them down, pick up your yarn again, figure out this was just done a top needle, so now I need a bottom needle, top needle, and so on and so forth. There are lots of other tutorials on Judy's Magic Cast-On if this is moving too quickly for you. Try and keep your needle tips the same amount of points. So I've just done one on the bottom, so now I need one on the top, bottom. Helps not to stop when you get a good flow. So go ahead and pause the video and then keep going until you have the right number of stitches on your needles. Once you have the desired number of stitches on your needles, I suggest doing your last cast on stitch as a backward loop or a half hitch knot. So I would need one more stitch on my bottom needle. So I take my yarn and I make a loop and I put the needle through that loop so that it hitches around the stitch. It's a backward loop cast on, and that just holds everything in place so that you don't have to worry about your stitches falling off. Now what you're looking at is the right side or the front of your fabric, and so if you turn it over you can see the purl bumps. So as you begin to knit, you need to make sure that you're looking at the right side. I take the stitches that will become my provisional stitches, and I'm just going to move them off of the cable so that it's a little bit easier to work with the stitches on the needle. If you have caps, you can put them on take your tips off and put caps on. If that's cumbersome, you can just, after a few rows, slide all these stitches onto waste yarn. And then they're already on a secure cord or a secure lifeline, and they can be picked up and used at a later time. But otherwise, you just start working your rows, or if you need to connect in the round. It's probably easiest to work one row flat and then join in the round, and then just seam up that edge. But you'll just work, if the pattern says to knit, you go ahead and knit, and then you keep working back and forth on your needle, and you've got all of these other stitches safely held and ready to be provisionally taken off and used to go the other direction.